Welcome to week 7, finally, of Bible Basics. We took a little bit of a pause last week. I wanted to dive into some of the scriptures that we couldn't get into because there was just a lot to dive in. This week, we're going to talk about both the scriptures and the rest of the New Testament until the end. So we're almost there. Got one more week left after this, I promise. So my goals for today's lesson are to help you comprehend the organization and the content of the New Testament books from 1 Thessalonians to the end to Revelation. I will also help you recite the assigned books in the order of how they appear and just continue enjoying learning the truth about the Bible. So it's one of the best books to read, whether you like mystery, drama, history, prophecy, all that kind of stuff, poetry, it's got it all. So let's get into today's. So today we're launching into the second half of the New Testament. We're almost done. Let's dig in and finish our trip. 2 weeks ago we stopped at Colossians, Paul's letter to the church in Colossae. Today we're going to cover the rest of his letters, the general epistles or letters that are written by others, in the final book being Revelation. So let's dive into it. 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. These two letters were written by Paul. 1st Thessalonians was written first, but only probably by a few months, and the purpose here was specifically to encourage the church to continue in their new faith. Paul founded the Thessalonian church on a previous missionary journey, and both of these letters contain an undercurrent of concern with the return of Christ. 1 Thessalonians 5:2 says, "You know very well that the day when the Lord comes again will be a surprise, like a thief who comes in the night." The day of the Lord is referring to a day of wrath. These are terrifying judgments from God for the overwhelming sinfulness of the world. Now, the future day of the Lord that unleashes God's wrath falls into two parts. The end of a 7-year tribulation phase that Revelations talks about, and the end of a millennium. I highly encourage you. Peter talks about the millennium, the 1,000-year difference between it all. There's way more information than I was wanting to dive into today, so check that out yourself. Again, I have a study Bible that has taught me a lot about it. So yeah, go check that out. The thief in the night phrase is used of Christ's coming judgment in the day of the Lord at the end of the 7-year tribulation, which is distinct from the rapture of the church and is used of the judgment that concludes the millennium. Again, a lot to dive into. Revelation talks about the day of the Lord and all that more so than I can. But check that out. That's as much as I can tell you. I'm sorry. Let's talk about the Timothys. 1st and 2nd Timothy, along with Titus, are known as the Pastoral Epistles or the Pastoral Letters, and this is because of how they're written. The content of these two, the Timothys and Titus, is geared towards instruction about how the church should care for people, and even got into how the church should function organizationally. 1st and 2nd Timothy, the audience is Timothy, a young helper of Paul, who Paul calls a son in the faith. Now, because of his youth, Timothy is up against some challenges in the church where he serves, which is the church of Ephesus. 1st and 2nd Timothy read it pretty much like an instruction manual. 1st Timothy was written around 64 AD, 2nd Timothy coming a couple of years later. 1 Timothy 4:12 says, "You are young, but don't let anyone treat you as if you aren't important. Be an example to show the believers how they should live. Show them by what you say, by the way you live, by your love, by your faith, and by your pure life." This is actually my foundational verse for my ministry. 2 Timothy, it extends. I believe I go 2 Timothy 4:10 through 16. But this is the verse that sticks to me. So, we'll get to why right now. Why do you think Paul said that to Timothy? Now, the Greek culture placed great value at the age of experience. Timothy was still in his 30s. For me, I'm 24, going to be 25. So a youth director being this young is not common. So, again, for Timothy being in his 30s, it was still young by the standards of that culture, and he would have to earn the respect by being a godly example. Because he had been to Paul since a young teen, Timothy had a lot of experience that matured him. I've been working within a church setting for 10 years. 7 years as a professional. I I've got into youth group in 2010, and I got to learn the inner mechanisms of how church business and how the church functions. So I've been doing church business for 10 years now. So that looking down on him because he was under 40 was inexcusable. And again, I pray that I've gained a lot of respect from the elders of the church, my pastor, all the different people I've worked with because of my experience. Now, how many of you feel like that's still true today? I just talked about that. I feel like this is still true. Again, I'm young, 25. I'm the youngest on our staff. Everybody else is older than me. So I have to come in with a different perspective of knowing what I'm talking about, executing well, all that kind of stuff, to set the example I need to set. So it's funny that they picked this one to talk about because this section fits so well. So let's go to Titus. This is also a pastoral letter. In it, Paul gives Titus instructions on how to manage the church. Titus is in Crete, Greek city, an island in the Mediterranean Sea. It was written about the same time as the Timothy's, about 64 AD. Titus 1:15 says, "To the people who are pure, everything is pure, but to those who are full of sin and don't believe, nothing is pure. Really, their thinking has become evil, and their consciences have been ruined." Now, the outwardly despicable things that those men practiced were just reflections of their inner corruption. If the mind was evil, it can't accurately inform the conscience, so the conscience can't warn the person. And when the conscience is accurately and fully infused with God's truth, it functions as the warning system that God designed. Titus has another key verse, Titus 1:8. I can't remember it, but it's good verse about control. Go read that one too. Philemon, or Philemon. I don't know how you pronounce it. It's the last book of the New Testament that we are certain that Paul wrote. And he wrote it to a man named Philemon, who was a member of the church in Colossae in about 60 AD. The purpose is simple. Paul is encouraging Philemon to forgive his runaway slave Onesimus and not to mistreat him. Philemon isn't widely read, but it gives a look inside how Paul related to individuals and was a pastor to many all over the known world at the time. So this is it. This concludes all of Paul's letters based off what we talked about a couple weeks ago and what we just finished today. Paul's letters are Romans, the Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, the Thessalonians, the Timothys, Titus, and Philemon. So now we're going to get what we call the general epistle, starting with Hebrews. General epistles just mean they're written by somebody who's not Paul. There is some debate who wrote this. The author is not known. Some suggest Paul wrote it, but we can't be certain. Other possibilities include Luke, Barnabas, or even a student of Paul's. Bottom line is, we don't know. There's also uncertainty over when it was written. We know it was before 70 AD, but other than that, there's no real way to get a firm date. The one thing that isn't a mystery in Hebrews, though, is the message. The theme of Hebrews is sufficiency of Christ. The author writes to the Jewish Christians to explain that Jesus is enough and the old ways are unnecessary. Hebrews 12:1-3 says, "We all have these great people around us as examples. Their lives tell us what faith means, so we too should run the race that is before us and never quit. We should remove from our lives anything that slows us down and the sin that so often makes us fall. And we must never stop looking to Jesus. He is the leader of our faith. He is the one who makes our faith complete. He suffered death on a cross, but he accepted the shame of the cross as if it were nothing because of the joy he could see waiting for him. And now he's sitting at the right side of God's throne." Think about Jesus. He patiently endured the angry insults that sinful people were shouting at him. Think about him so that you won't get discouraged and stop trying. There's not more I want to say because that says it all. So let's go to James. As Jesus' brother, James didn't believe in him until after Jesus' resurrection. And at that point, he became a leader in the early church and writes this letter to expose the hypocrisy amongst Jewish Christians of his day. He wrote pretty early, about 49 to 50 AD, and it reads similar to the Old Testament wisdom literature. Who can remember what that is? Good. That's Job, Proverbs, Psalms. That's about. Well, actually, no, that's poetry. Proverbs and Psalms, I would say, more so the wisdom literature. Oh, and Ecclesiastes. Thank you, Bible Project, for mentioning that. And James has been called the Proverbs of the New Testament. And of the general letters, it's probably the most popular. James 1:2 says, "My brothers and sisters, you will have many kinds of trouble, but this gives you a reason to be very happy." Confusing, I know. The English Standard Version translates the end of this to "count it all joy." Now, the Greek word for count may also be translated to consider or evaluate. So the natural human response to trials is not to rejoice. Therefore, the believer must make the conscious commitment to face them with joy. Face the evils, face the anger, face the disappointment with joy. I know that's hard to do. It's not our normal human response in 2020, but that's what we need to do. 1st and 2nd Peter, if you don't know the author, it's pretty easy to find out. It's right there in the title. I don't know what else to tell you. But what you might not know is the backstory of why Peter wrote these. Now, there was a great persecution going on in the Roman Empire against Christians, and it's during this persecution that Peter was later killed. As he writes 1 Peter in 62 to 64 AD and 2 Peter in about 67 AD, Christians empire-wide are being tortured and are suffering for their faith. So that sets the backdrop for these letters, which are themed around encouragement for the sufferer. 1 Peter 1:15 says, "Be holy in everything you do, just as God is holy. He is the one who chose you." Now, holy can be a big church word, so let's break it down. It essentially defines the Christian's new nature and conduct in contrast with his pre-salvation lifestyle. So, new conduct before you met Jesus. That's contrasted with before you came to know Jesus. The reason for practicing a holy manner of living is that Christians are associated with the holy God, and must treat him and his word with respect and reverence. Therefore, we must glorify him best by being like God. There you go. Now we'll go to 3 books in 1, John's. What makes these 3 epistles of John unique is that they don't have an addressed church in particular. 1 John is addressed to no one, 2 John is addressed to a chosen lady, and 3 John to Gaius. 2nd and 3rd John are also really short, which adds to their uniqueness. However, John's letters do have a lot to say, speaking on the themes of love, truth, and laced with warnings not to be swept away by false teaching. These letters offer valuable guidance even today. 1 John 1:9 says, "But if we confess our sins, God will forgive us." We can trust God to do this. He always does what is right. He will make us clean from all the wrong things we've done. The term confess means to say the same thing about sin that God does, to acknowledge his perspective about sin. Confession of sin characterizes genuine Christians, and God continually cleanses those who are confessing. So rather than focusing on confession for every single sin as necessary, John has especially in mind here a settled recognition and acknowledgement that one is a sinner in need of cleansing and forgiveness. There you go. And then we hit the last general letter, Jude, whose author bore the same name. Jude is also a brother of Jesus, and like James, didn't believe in his brother from the beginning. He wrote this in about 65 AD, and similar to 2nd and 3rd John, Jude only has 1 chapter. And the theme of his book is to avoid evildoers and do good. Jude verses 22 and 23 says, "Help those who have doubts, rescue those who are living in danger of hell's fire. There are others that you should treat with mercy, but be very careful that their filthy lives don't rub off on you." So this now ends letters that weren't written from Paul. Hebrews, James, the Peters, the Johns, and Jude. And that leads us to the final book of the Bible, Revelation. Now, Revelation is the only New Testament book about prophecy. It's been studied for many centuries as a book that offers us clues to the end of age. And indeed it does. It's also a book that had first century purpose, and its themes are much simpler than have been sensationalized by today's times. The true theme of Revelation, based off of what you've heard as I've called it apocalyptic, is hope for believers. As Christians endured suffering and persecution for their faith, the book of Revelation offers a glimpse at the result, something anyone who is struggling needs. What was revealed was a glorious hope in Christ, an eternal hope in heaven, and a reason to worship today. The Apostle John recorded these words of Revelation as they were spoken to him by Jesus when he was in captivity on an island called Patmos. Revelations 1:3 says, "Great blessing belongs to the person who reads the word of this message from God, and to those who hear this message and do what is written in it." There's not much time left. Now, time here refers to a season, and the next great season of God's redemptive history is imminent. But although Christ's coming is the next event, it may be delayed so long that people begin to question whether if he'll even come. That, my friends, is the end of talking about the New Testament. Next week, we're going to talk about how to best study the Bible. And actually, I'll give you a sneak preview. I've been doing this lately, and I don't know why. So, okay. So, yep, there's 3 actions we're going to talk about: pray, read, and ask. So, here we go. So, again, we'll cover that this week. I thought about merging the 2 together, but there's just too much to throw in. But that's okay. So we'll cover it next week, and that wraps us up for this whole series that we started 9 weeks ago. 9 weeks ago at this point. Or by the time we wrap this up. So after that, I haven't set a final decision on what the next study will be. I'm looking right now to do another 8-week series just on the book of Philippians alone. I think it'll be interesting enough to do, but we will see. I don't know. So you just have to stick around to the first Sunday in June to find out. But yeah. So again, thank you guys for tuning in. Again, we got 1 more week of this left, so let me run through the announcements real quick about what you should expect coming up in the following week, and we'll see you back for the series finale. On Wednesday, we're starting a brand new youth lesson series called Jesus the Real Life, where it takes a look at Jesus' life as a reality TV show. It'll be a fun series, a nice 6-week series, and I hope you'll show up. On Friday, the 29th, we continue our Minecraft Let's Play, Part 3. So join us Friday at 6. Oh, yeah, the Core Series Wednesday at 6. I can't remember if I said it. But, yeah, Let's Play Minecraft Part 3. Hopefully I'll find more coal this time than I did last. And then on Saturday, we continue our Deep Blue series, Deep Blue Returns, with learning about Pentecost, because Pentecost Sunday will be the 31st. So, and then again, we will meet right back here Sunday to wrap up Bible Basics. And stick around to our church's Facebook, because yours truly is preaching. That's right, I get to preach. We are having our graduation recognition service, and you get to hear me talk about control and tempting faith. So let's see what we can do. So thank you all for watching. I hope you have a blessed week, as we are hopefully nearing the end of quarantine life. Who knows? As we think about the end times, like Jesus said, the dates and times are not for us to know right now. So we'll take it one day at a time. But again, have a blessed week. I will see you on Wednesday for Jesus the Real Life Part 1. And until then, I want you to stay blessed.